The first image was her back hitting the mahogany desk. Not a stumble. Not a retreat. A throw. Luca Gallo's hand was still extended, the force of it still vibrating through his tailored sleeve as Valentina Ricci caught herself on the edge of the desk with both palms. Ledger sheets scattering like confetti across the Persian rug. Numbers bleeding into numbers, 3 years of careful, meticulous, unknowing sin exposed in a single manila folder. You knew. His voice was almost tender. That was the terrifying part. The quieter Luca Gallo got, the closer death was. You had to have known. I processed invoices. Her voice didn't shake. She willed it not to. Construction materials. Real estate. I didn't ask. His hand found her throat before she finished the sentence. Not squeezing. Not yet. Just resting there like a promise. No, Luca said softly, tilting his head as though she were a math problem he was solving. You're too smart for that excuse. And that means you've been protecting yourself. Which means you have copies. His thumb pressed just slightly inward. Which means you belong to me now. Because you always have. Valentina looked him in the eye and said absolutely nothing. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of his 40th floor office, Chicago blazed gold and copper in the late October afternoon. The lake shimmered like hammered bronze. It was the most beautiful city in the world. And it had just become her cage. Luca released her throat with a gentleness that felt more threatening than the grip had been. He walked to the bar cart and poured 2 fingers of Barolo, not for her, and stood with his back to the windows, watching her straighten herself. Your father, he said conversationally, owes this family $400,000. Accrued interest on a loan he took in 2011 to cover his gambling debts. We let it sit because Franco Ricci was useful once. He sipped the wine. He is no longer useful. But his daughter. His eyes moved over her with that particular stillness that turned her skin to ice. Is becoming very interesting to me. What do you want? She hated how steady she sounded. She felt anything but. Right now? I want you to sit down. I have a proposition. And if I don't like it? Then your father doesn't wake up tomorrow. He said it the way people talked about the weather. Then. Sunday death. Sit down, Valentina. She sat down. If you walked in looking for a love story and found yourself holding your breath instead, you're exactly where you belong. This isn't a fairy tale. This is what happens when a woman with nothing left to lose gets caught between 2 men who've decided she's worth starting a war over. Subscribe now. Don't miss a single second of what's coming. The proposition was this. Valentina would become the Gallo family's exclusive financial architect. She would restructure the shell companies, sanitize the money flows, and make the Gallo empire completely untouchable to federal scrutiny. In exchange, her father's debt was erased. She would be housed in the Gallo compound, for her safety, Luca said, which meant for his control, and she would answer only to him. She had approximately 45 minutes to decide. While she sat in Luca's outer office under the board watch of 2 soldiers, she memorized everything. The compound occupied the top 3 floors of a building on Michigan Avenue that publicly belonged to a real estate holding company. Below that, a restaurant, a law firm, a financial advisory service. All Gallo fronts. All legitimate on paper. All humming with Luca's version of order. Men in expensive suits moved through corridors with the practiced deference of a feudal court. They addressed each other by rank. Consigliere. Capo. Don. Italian fell between them like a second language everyone had grown up speaking in the bones. She watched Luca's younger brother Enzo cross the outer office, stop when he saw her, and do something none of the others had done. He looked sorry. Miss Ricci. His voice was low. He'll honor the deal. For whatever it's worth. Is it worth anything? Enzo Gallo's jaw worked. With Luca? Yes. His word is the one thing he doesn't break. And everything else? He didn't answer. He walked away. Which was answer enough. She said yes. Of course she said yes. What nobody told Valentina Ricci that first night in the Gallo compound, as she was escorted to a guest suite that locked from the outside, was that 40 miles north on the lake, in a limestone mansion in Winnetka, a man named Dante Marchetti was reading a file with her photograph clipped to the front of it. He read it twice. Then he looked up at his underboss, Rocco, who stood at the edge of the desk radiating the particular tension of a man delivering news he hadn't wanted to deliver. Luca has her. I can see that. Dante set the file down. His voice was perfectly even. His hands were still. Nothing about him suggested urgency, which was precisely what made Rocco nervous, because Dante Marchetti's stillness was a pressure system building toward weather. She's Franco Ricci's daughter. Franco Ricci laundered money for the Gallos for 20 years. Dante turned the photograph over with one finger. And in 2019 he also came to me. Told me he'd kept a second set of books. Every transaction. Every shell company. Every wire transfer going back 15 years. He paused. He wanted protection in exchange for the records. I told him I'd consider it. Did you? I never got the chance. He disappeared before I could arrange a meeting. Dante stood, walking to the window that faced the ink-dark lake. But he had a daughter who worked in finance, and I always wondered if he gave those records to her instead. Rocco was quiet for a moment. So she might have them. She might have everything. Dante picked up the file again, which means she's either the most dangerous woman in Chicago, or the most valuable. A beat. Or both, Rocco said. Or both, Dante agreed. He was still looking at the photograph. She didn't sleep. The suite was beautiful. More beautiful than her apartment in Wicker Park, which she'd furnished herself over 4 years on an accountant's salary. Here there were silk curtains and a marble bathroom, and a view of the city she'd always loved from a height she'd never been able to afford. It felt like a very expensive coffin. She sat on the edge of the bed and catalogued what she knew. 1. Her father had borrowed money from the Gallos and couldn't repay it. 2. For 3 years she'd processed invoices for a firm called Meridian Solutions, which she now understood was a Gallo front. 3. She had, without fully knowing it, been meticulous. She kept copies of everything. A professional habit. A survival instinct she'd developed in a childhood where the adults around her were consistently unreliable. 4. Those copies were in a safety deposit box at a bank on Wabash, under a name that wasn't hers. 5. If Luca Gallo ever found that out, she was dead. But she was also, she realized with a cold clarity that surprised even her, the only leverage she had. She pulled her knees to her chest and looked at Chicago glittering 40 floors below and thought, I am not going to die in a beautiful room. I refuse. The call came at 3 a.m. Her burner phone, the one she'd had since her father's behavior started scaring her 2 years ago, buzzed in her bra, where she'd hidden it during the search they'd done when she arrived. Apparently they'd been looking for weapons, not old Nokia bricks. Unknown number. Chicago area code. She answered in the bathroom with the shower running. Miss Ricci. A man's voice. Deep, precise, unhurried. My name is Dante Marchetti. I think you and I should meet. She felt the name land in her chest like a stone dropped in water. How did you get this number? Your father gave it to me. A pause. A while ago. He trusted me enough to reach out. I'm hoping you'll trust me enough to hear me out. I'm inside a Gallo compound. I know. Another pause. Longer. Deliberate. That's why I'm calling now instead of later. Because by morning Luca will have swept this place for signals. And that phone becomes a liability. So I need you to listen carefully. She listened. What Dante Marchetti told her in 4 minutes and 17 seconds was this. He knew about the second set of books. He knew she had them, or suspected as much. He was offering her a way out of the Gallo compound. Not freedom, he was honest about that, but a different captivity. One with different rules. And at the end of it, possibly something that looked like a future. Why would you do that? She asked. Because those records destroy Luca Gallo. And that's been my objective for 11 years. And what do I get? Your father lives, Dante said. And so do you. That's not nothing, Miss Ricci. She turned off the shower and stood in the steamed silence and made the decision that changed everything. Tell me when. It happened at 7 the next morning during a shift change. 2 Gallo soldiers went off duty. Their replacements, 2 men whose faces Valentina had never seen, arrived 12 minutes early, which was unusual enough that the departing guards mentioned it to each other, but not unusual enough to halt. By the time anyone realized the replacements weren't Gallo men at all, Valentina was in a black SUV moving north on Lakeshore Drive at exactly the speed limit. She sat in the back seat between a woman she didn't recognize, compact, dark-eyed, with a Marchetti family crest tattooed on the inside of her left wrist, and a man with a broken nose and patient hands resting on his thighs. No one spoke for 11 minutes. Then the woman said, "I'm Sarah Marchetti. Don't be scared of my brother. He's not Luca." "That's a low bar," Valentina said.
Serait-ce mout curvé?
"You'd be surprised how many people in this city can't clear it." The Marchetti compound in Winnetka looked like a Ralph Lauren advertisement and felt like a fortress. Limestone exterior. Wrought iron gates. Gardens that had been planted and pruned by professionals for 40 years. Inside, dark wood, cream plaster, oil paintings of a family she was about to become entangled with. Dante Marchetti was standing in the library when Sarah brought her in. He was taller than she'd expected. Well over 6 feet, lean in the way of men who'd stayed physically disciplined not for vanity, but because their survival had once depended on it. Dark hair, recently cut. A jaw that held a tension that never quite resolved. He wore a charcoal suit with no tie, the collar of his shirt open 2 buttons, revealing the edge of a tattoo along his collarbone that she couldn't quite make out. He looked at her the way she imagined a chess player looked at the board before a critical move. Not hungry. Assessing. "Miss Ricci." "Mr. Marchetti." She kept her voice neutral and watched his eyes register it. The steadiness she was performing and the effort it was costing her, both. "Sit down. I'll tell you exactly where you stand." "I'd prefer to stand." A beat. Something shifted in his expression. Not irritation exactly. More like recalibration. "All right." He told her the truth. All of it, as far as he knew it. The Marchetti Gallo war that had been simmering for 11 years. Ever since Luca Gallo had orchestrated the death of Dante's father and made it look like a rival hit. The FBI investigation that was slowly circling both families. The records that Franco Ricci had kept, which could, if properly presented, take Luca Gallo apart. "And you need me to retrieve them," Valentina said. "I need you to give them to me voluntarily, which is different than taking them." "How?" "Because you keep copies. Because you testify to what you know. Because you become a witness rather than a hostage." He paused. "And because when this is over, you walk away intact. That's my word." She looked at him for a long moment. "Your word. The word of a man who just had me smuggled out of a rival's building at dawn." "Yes." "That's not very reassuring." "No," Dante agreed. "But it's all I have." She hated that it was enough. She was given a room in the East Wing. A real room, not a locked suite. Though she wasn't naive enough to think she could simply leave. The Marchetti household operated on a different frequency than the Gallo compound. Where Luca ran his empire on fear and personal magnetism, Dante ran his on structure. There were schedules, protocols. People addressed each other by name, not rank, in the private rooms. The kitchen smelled like espresso and his grandmother's marinara at 7 in the morning because his grandmother, Nonna Carmela, 81, 5 feet tall, sharp as a blade, cooked when she was anxious. "She's been cooking since your name came through the gates," Sarah told Valentina over breakfast, with a wry look at the older woman stirring a pot large enough to feed 12. "Should I be worried? Nana cooks for people she thinks are in trouble. She cooked for 3 days straight after our father died." Valentina looked at Nonna Carmela, who looked back at her with dark, ancient, knowing eyes, and said in Italian, "Mangia, you're too thin for what's coming." Valentina didn't speak Italian, but she understood the sentiment. That afternoon, Inspector Rafael Diaz called Dante's direct line. Sarah caught the call on the monitoring system and came to find Dante in the war room. A converted study lined with whiteboards and photographs and the architecture of years of intelligence gathering. "Diaz," Sarah said. Dante's eyes went flat. "What does he want?" "He knows we have her. He's offering a deal. If Valentina testifies to what she knows about Gallo's finances, he'll grant her full immunity and protective custody. And us." He was careful not to mention us. Dante was quiet for a long moment. "Which means he's not offering us anything." He'll take what she gives him and use whatever falls on us. Yes. Tell him we'll be in touch. He said she has 72 hours before he goes a different direction. Dante said nothing. He picked up a photograph of Luca Gallo taken outside a restaurant in River North and looked at it with the focused patience of a man who had been waiting 11 years for the right moment and had learned not to rush. She found him on the back terrace at 11 that night. She hadn't meant to. She'd gone looking for the kitchen, couldn't sleep, hadn't eaten enough, and taken a wrong turn and pushed open a glass door, and there he was, sitting in the cold October dark with his suit jacket over the back of a chair, and his sleeves rolled to the elbows, a glass of wine untouched beside him. He was looking at the lake. She should have retreated. She didn't. Your grandmother was right, she said. About what's coming. He turned his head, looked at her without the assessment she'd grown used to, just looked. Are you afraid? Constantly, she said. I've learned to work through it. When did you learn that? She almost deflected. Almost. When I was 7 and my father came home drunk, and my mother wasn't there anymore to manage him. Someone had to be calm. She paused. I've been calm ever since. Something moved through Dante's expression that wasn't pity. She would have left immediately if it was pity, but recognition. I was 8, he said, when I understood my father was Don before he was my father, and that being his son meant I'd inherited his enemies. Did you want out? She asked. Ever? A long pause. Every day until I was 23. He picked up the wine. Then I stopped wanting things I couldn't have. She sat down across from him because her legs had decided to stop cooperating. They sat in silence for a while, the lake moving darkly below, the cold air carrying the smell of wood smoke in distance. It was the most honest conversation she'd had in years. It terrified her more than Luca's hand on her throat had. The call that shattered everything came at noon the next day. Enzo Gallo's voice on a blocked number. Shaking. He knows where you are. He's known since this morning. He has someone inside the Marchetti house. Valentina's blood went cold. How long do we have? He's moving tonight. He wants you back and he wants Dante Marchetti's head. A pause that sounded like grief. I'm sorry. I couldn't, he's my brother. I couldn't stop him from. His voice broke. I'm sorry, Valentina. The line went dead. She found Dante in 60 seconds. He was already on his phone. Rocco had picked up the signal irregularity that meant someone inside the compound had been feeding information. The mole was a soldier named Carmine, 3rd year with the Marchetti family. He was found in the basement communications room with a phone that wasn't his. Valentina stood at the edge of the room and watched Dante look at Carmine with the stillness she'd learned to read as the most dangerous sign of all. Why? Dante said. One word. Carmine was shaking. My mother. Gallo has my mother. He said if I didn't get his mother out of wherever Gallo has her. Dante said to Rocco without inflection. And then take Carmine somewhere he can think about his choices. He turned away from both of them as they were taken out. He looked at Valentina. We move tonight, he said. All of us. To where? Somewhere Luca can't follow without declaring war. And if he declares war anyway? Dante's jaw set. Then we give him one. They moved the household in 4 hours. Nana Carmela packed her kitchen equipment first, which told Valentina everything about the family hierarchy. Sarah coordinated the security rotation with the economy of someone who'd done this before. Dante moved through it all like a current, directing, deciding, steady in the way that makes people feel safe even when nothing is. The new location was a warehouse district property in Pilsen, a converted brick factory that looked industrial from the outside, and was a compound on the inside. South Side territory, technically contested ground between the two families. Neutral, or as close to neutral as anything got in this city. They arrived at 2 a.m. The city was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic and rain beginning on the windows. Valentina helped Nana Carmela carry boxes from the van, because it was something to do with her hands. The old woman watched her with those sharp dark eyes and said, in the Italian that Valentina was beginning to piece together from context, something that Sarah translated quietly as, she says you have the eyes of a woman who has decided something but not yet let herself know what it is. Valentina thought about Dante on the terrace, about the lake, about the fact that she'd slept for 6 hours straight for the first time in years the previous night, inside a Marchetti house, surrounded by people with reasons to protect her, and one man who had looked at her like she was real. She didn't say anything. Nana Carmela patted her hand like she didn't need to. If you're still here, you already know this isn't just a story. It's a descent into a world where love and violence are the same language, where protection looks like possession, and surrender feels like power. He's running out of ways to keep her safe without keeping her captive. She's running out of reasons to fight him when fighting feels like the only thing keeping her alive. Subscribe, because the people who stay for this kind of darkness understand that the most dangerous thing you can do is fall for someone who was never supposed to let you live. Lucas sent a message at dawn. Not a call. Not a threat through intermediaries. He sent it through the traditional channel. A letter, handwritten, delivered by a courier to the gate of the Pilsen property. Dante read it alone in the kitchen with the first espresso of the morning going cold beside him. Then he read it again. Then he folded it and put it in his jacket pocket, and didn't show it to anyone. He found Valentina in the makeshift office she'd set up in a corner of the warehouse. Laptop, yellow legal pads, 3 different colored pens. A system that made his head hurt and probably made perfect sense to her. She was working on something. She didn't look up when he came in. The records, he said. The ones at the bank on Wabash. She looked up. I need you to know that whatever you decide about those records, whatever you choose, I will not take them from you. I will not make you use them. She stared at him. That's why you brought me here. That's the entire play. Yes. He sat down across from her. But it stopped being just that somewhere around yesterday morning on a back terrace. He let that settle. And I would rather lose the war than make you into collateral. She felt the words move through her like something seismic and quiet. What did Luca's letter say? She asked. A pause. That you have 1 week. After that he stops asking. And what does that mean? It means he stops limiting himself to you. Dante's voice stayed even. It means your father. Anyone you've ever known. Scorched earth. The room was very quiet. Tell me what you need from me, Valentina said. They worked through the night. Not physically. Not yet, though the charge between them had become something that was difficult to stand in without acknowledging. They worked on the records. She walked him through the financial architecture of the Gallo empire. The shell companies, the real estate layering, the offshore accounts that looped through the Caymans and Liechtenstein and back into legitimate Chicago businesses. He was sharp, she found. Sharper than she'd expected. He asked the right questions and remembered the answers and built a picture in his head that she could watch him constructing behind those steady, dark eyes. At some point Sarah appeared with food. At some point Nana Carmela shuffled through in her robe, and looked at the two of them bent over a table covered in documents, and made a sound that contained an entire paragraph of satisfaction, and shuffled back out. At 4 a.m., Valentina made an error in a calculation, tired for once after days of running on adrenaline, and caught it and said something sharp and frustrated, and Dante looked at the number she was pointing at and said, "No, you're right. Look at this." And his hand came over hers on the legal pad, guiding her attention, and they both went very still. His hand didn't move. She didn't pull away. "You're the smartest person I've met in years," he said quietly. "In a world where intelligence is dangerous." Is that a compliment or a warning? Both. She turned her hand under his and his fingers closed around hers. And for a moment the city and the war, and everything that stood between them didn't exist. Then his phone rang, and the moment shattered, and they went back to work. Inspector Rafael Diaz arrived at the Pilsen property without an invitation at 9 a.m. He'd found them. Valentina didn't ask how. The FBI had resources that made her cold when she thought about them too long. He sat across from Dante in the warehouse's main room with 2 agents outside the door, and made the offer formal and official. Full immunity for Miss Ricci. Federal protection for the duration of the prosecution. In exchange for the Gallo records and her testimony. He paused. "We're not interested in the Marchetti family at this time." "At this time," Dante repeated. "At this time," Diaz confirmed, which meant of course they were interested and this deal expired the moment Valentina was no longer useful. Valentina sat beside Dante and felt him become perfectly still. That pressure system building, and spoke before he could. What happens to my father? He'd need to testify as well. We'd offer him the same protection. And if I say no? Diaz looked at her with the particular exhaustion of a man who had been doing this for too long. Then I picked the next best option. Which is messier. And less good for you. After Diaz left, promised a response in 24 hours, Dante stood at the window and said nothing for a long time. If you take his deal, Dante finally said, you're safe. Your father is safe. And the Marchetti family? Exposed. Eventually. He turned. I'm not asking you to protect us, Valentina. I would never ask you that. Then what are you asking? His jaw worked. He looked at her with something she'd never seen on him before, something unguarded. I'm asking you what you want. For once in this whole mess. What do you want? She opened her mouth and closed it. It was the first time anyone in her adult life had asked her that question and meant it. Luca Gallo didn't wait a week. The call came from Enzo at 3 p.m. His voice had gone past shaking into something flat and awful. He has your father, Valentina. He picked him up this morning. He's at the Gallo property in Bridgeport. The world tilted. Dante was across the room in 4 strides, his hand on her arm, steadying, not restraining, before she'd processed that she was standing. Listen to me, he said. Quiet. Absolute. Look at me. She looked at him. I will get your father out. That's my promise. But you cannot go charging into a Gallo stronghold. He's my father. He's bait. Dante's grip tightened slightly. Luca knows exactly what pulling your father will do to you. It's designed to make you move without thinking. She knew he was right. She hated that she knew he was right. So what do? We call Diaz, Dante said. And the fact that it cost him something to say it, the fact that she could see that, made her love him. She stopped breathing for a second. She hadn't let herself use that word even in the privacy of her own head until this moment. Dante was already on the phone. It took 2 hours to build the plan. It required 3 calls to Diaz, 1 to Enzo, 1 to a Marchetti capo named Silvio, who owed Dante a debt large enough to cover what was being asked, and 1 to the bank manager on Wabash who had known the Marchetti family for 30 years. The records would go to the FBI. All of them. Every copy. The ones in the safety deposit box, the backups on an encrypted drive she'd hidden in her apartment 3 years ago when her instincts first began screaming at her, the copies she hadn't told anyone about. Diaz's deal, accepted. With one modification. The modification was Dante's idea, and it was legally audacious and morally complicated and might not hold in court. The records implicate the Gallo family specifically, Valentina said on the phone with Diaz. My testimony covers financial transactions I can directly authenticate. It does not extend to any party whose transactions I did not process. Diaz was silent for a moment. That's a very narrow definition of your testimony's scope. That's my offer. Another silence. The Gallos are the primary target. We can work with that. After she hung up, she turned to find Dante watching her. You just protected my family, he said. I testified to what I know. I don't know anything about Marchetti finances. She paused. I've been careful not to learn anything about Marchetti finances. Something moved across his face. Something she was learning to read as the closest he got to undone. Valentina. Don't, she said softly. Don't thank me. Just go get my father. Luca Gallo's Bridgeport property was a brownstone on Halstead that had been in the Gallo family for 3 generations. It was residential in appearance, window boxes, a painted door, a narrow front walk, and a fortress in reality. For soldiers on the exterior. 6 inside. Franco Ricci in a basement room that Enzo had mapped on a napkin, and passed to a dead drop in Wicker Park that Dante's people swept 40 minutes later. Diaz provided federal assets. For agents, plain clothes. Enough to make the approach legal and complicated for Luca to openly resist. Dante provided something else. He arrived at the Bridgeport brownstone in person. Valentina found this out from Sarah, who found out from Rocco, who tried to stop Dante and failed, which apparently everyone who had ever tried to stop Dante Marchetti from doing something he'd decided to do also experienced. He's drawing Luca out, Sarah said. Her voice was tight, making it personal, making it about the two of them rather than about you or the records. She stopped. It's effective. And it's stupid. Can he handle Luca? Sarah's eyes met hers. He's been waiting 11 years to handle Luca. What happened on Halstead Street took 19 minutes, and was never fully reported in the press. What was reported? A federal operation in Bridgeport resulted in the arrest of Luca Gallo, Capo Marco Fanucci, and 3 Gallo soldiers. The charges: racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy to commit extortion, kidnapping. The evidence: a comprehensive set of financial records provided by a cooperative witness. What was not reported? Dante Marchetti walked into the brownstone past 2 federal agents and met Luca Gallo in the front hallway. What passed between them took approximately 3 minutes. Luca Gallo came out of that hallway with a split lip and a stillness that suggested the conversation had cost him something beyond the physical. Dante came out with blood on his knuckles and nothing readable on his face at all. Franco Ricci came up from the basement looking pale and frightened, and considerably older than his photographs. He was met by his daughter, who arrived in the second wave of vehicles, who stood on the sidewalk in the gray October morning, and looked at him the way people look at things they've been told to feel and don't know how to yet. Valentina, Franco said. You're okay, she said. Not a question. Not an absolution. Just a fact she was establishing. I'm so sorry. I've made such. I know, she said. We'll talk about it later. Are you hurt? He wasn't. She put him in a federal vehicle and watched it pull away and turned around, and Dante Marchetti was standing behind her. He was looking at her the way he had on the terrace by the lake. Just looking. She crossed the distance between them, and didn't let herself think about it, and his arms came around her before she'd fully arrived, solid and certain, and she pressed her face against his chest and let herself shake for approximately 30 seconds. He held on. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. Sometimes the most important things don't require words. The months after were not simple. Nothing ever was. Valentina testified before a grand jury in December. The Gallo family's financial architecture unraveled with the precision she'd always brought to her work. Methodical, documented, irrefutable. Luca's attorney was very good. It didn't matter. The records were better. Enzo Gallo cooperated with federal investigators and negotiated reduced charges. He called Valentina once, from a number she didn't recognize, and said only, "I hope you find something good on the other side of all this." She told him she'd try. Her father went through a rehabilitation program. She visited twice before Christmas. The second visit was easier than the first. These things are slow. Forgiveness isn't a moment, it's a practice. The Marchetti family was not charged. The records Valentina provided did not touch them. Inspector Diaz closed the Marchetti file 18 months later with a notation that described inconclusive evidence, which was technically accurate and politically complicated, and the result of a very careful woman who had decided what she knew and what she didn't. Dante sold the Winnetka property. He moved into a smaller space in Lincoln Park. He was restructuring things, Sarah told her, with the studied casualness of a woman delivering information her brother had asked her not to deliver. Restructuring how? Valentina asked. Legitimizing, Sarah said. Slowly. She paused. It's not a short process. But he started. Valentina thought about that for a long time. He came to find her in February, on a night when the city had gone silver and cold, and the lake was frozen for the first time in years. She was in her new apartment in Logan Square, a better apartment, in a building with doormen, because some things you earn by surviving. She'd gone back to work as an independent consultant, which paid better than Meridian Solutions ever had, and involved considerably less felony. She knew it was him before she opened the door. She didn't know how she knew. He stood in the hallway with snow still in his hair, and a bottle of Barolo in his hand. Her wine, she realized. He'd learned what she drank. I know I'm not supposed to be here, he said. By any reasonable metric. No. I know that you've had enough of men who think they know what's good for you. Yes. And I know that what I can offer you isn't simple or safe, and probably involves my grandmother trying to feed you for the rest of your natural life. Something cracked open in her chest. Something that had been sealed shut since she was 7 years old. In a house where the adults couldn't be counted on, and someone had to be calm. Dante. Yes. Are you going to keep listing obstacles or are you going to come inside? He came inside. He stayed. Here is what the story doesn't wrap neatly. The Marchetti family still exists. Dante's legitimate restructuring takes years. It isn't a transformation, it's a long excavation. There are nights when his phone rings and he steps outside and comes back with that particular stillness. And she has learned not to ask because the answer is something she has decided she can live with. Her father is sober. Mostly. They are rebuilding something that doesn't have a name yet. It is painful and it is real. Luca Gallo receives a 12-year federal sentence. He looks at her across the courtroom on the day the verdict is read. And his expression contains something that is not quite hatred and not quite love. And is more disturbing than either. She holds his gaze until he looks away first. Enzo Gallo, last she hears, is somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. Sarah Marchetti sends Christmas cards to address as Valentina, doesn't fully understand how they find. And Valentina Ricci, who spent 3 years unwittingly building a labyrinth for criminals, and then spent one violent, impossible autumn burning it down. Valentina Ricci sits in a kitchen in Lincoln Park on a Tuesday morning in March, drinking espresso that is too strong, while a man who was never supposed to let her live reads the newspaper across from her, and the lake glitters beyond the window, and Nana Carmela's pot of marinara simmers on the stove. She is not safe. She has never believed in safe. But she is, against all reasonable odds, exactly where she chose to be. And that, in the end, is everything. If this story found you when you needed it, pass it on to someone who understands that some love stories are written in blood and sealed with sacrifice. If you've ever been caught between the monster you should fear and the man you can't stop wanting, you belong here. Subscribe so these stories keep finding the people who need them. And if you want to know what happens next, if he finds her, if she survives him, if love is enough when everything else burns, tell me in the comments. Because in this world, nothing is ever truly over.